In the treacherous mountains of Kunar Province, Afghanistan, a 120-pound Marine combat medic was about to face the ultimate test of courage. What started as a routine reconnaissance patrol took a deadly turn when they came face to face with a coordinated enemy ambush. Corporal Hannah Reyes wasn't your typical warrior. For 23 years, she had spent her life proving that size didn't define strength, from carrying injured cattle on her Texas ranch to earning top scores in field medicine, known for her unshakable determination under pressure. When enemy fire erupted from 3 sides simultaneously, leaving 2 Marines critically wounded with no radio contact, she had no idea she was walking into a moment that would define the very meaning of semper fidelis. Hannah made a decision that defied every tactical protocol to carry both wounded Marines 5 miles through hostile territory on improvised stretchers. What began as doubt from fellow Marines about her physical capabilities would become a legendary act of heroism. The Corps would never be the same after the night a petite medic proved that courage isn't measured in pounds or inches, but in the refusal to leave anyone behind. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The ballroom at the Marriott Wardman Park buzzed with the low murmur of 300 Marines, past and present, gathered for the annual Corps birthday ceremony. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over dress blue uniforms and formal evening wear, while the scent of coffee and polished brass filled the air. At the head table, Gunnery Sergeant Cole Vance adjusted his white dress gloves and reviewed his notes one final time. Near the back of the room, almost hidden behind a marble pillar, Corporal Hannah Reyes stood in a simple black dress that seemed to swallow her petite frame. At 34, she still carried herself with the same quiet composure that had once earned her both respect and skepticism from her fellow Marines. Her dark hair was pulled back at a neat bun, and her hands fidgeted with the small purse hanging from her shoulder. "You're going to bolt, aren't you?" Staff Sergeant Elena Navarro appeared beside her, resplendent in her dress blues, the gold chevrons catching the light. At 42, Navarro had lost none of her commanding presence, though her expression now held warmth reserved for those she considered family. "You're going to bolt, aren't you?" Staff Sergeant Elena Navarro appeared beside her, resplendent in her dress blues, the gold chevrons catching the light. At 42, Navarro had lost none of her commanding presence, though her expression now held warmth reserved for those she considered family. "I shouldn't have come," Hannah whispered, her eyes scanning the exits. "This isn't for me, Elena. You know that." Navarro's jaw tightened slightly. "It's exactly for you. That's why I didn't tell you the whole truth about tonight." Before Hannah could respond, the ceremony began. A Marine honor guard presented the colors while the band played the Marines' hymn. Hannah found herself straightening instinctively, muscle memory from 1,000 formations taking over. Around her, civilians and veterans alike stood at attention, but her eyes remained fixed on the floor. Vance approached the podium, his medals forming perfect rows across his chest. His gaze swept the room and paused when it found Hannah's face. Recognition flickered across his features, surprise, then something that might have been shame. He cleared his throat and began. "Tonight, we gathered not just to celebrate our Corps' birthday, but to honor those among us who embody the finest traditions of our service. Sometimes, the greatest acts of courage happen in darkness, witnessed by few, remembered by those who matter most." Hannah's breath caught. Elena's hand found her elbow, steadying her. 14 years ago, in the mountains of Kunar Province, Afghanistan, a Marine combat medic faced an impossible choice. With 2 critically wounded Marines and no way to call for help, this Marine made a decision that would define not just one night, but the very meaning of semper fidelis. The room had gone completely still. Hannah felt the blood drain from her face. 5 miles through enemy territory, 2 wounded Marines on improvised stretchers, 1 medic who refused to leave anyone behind. The applause started somewhere in the middle of the room and spread like wildfire. Hannah backed toward the pillar, but Elena's grip was firm. "You earned this," Alana whispered. "Let them say it." As the applause died down, Hannah closed her eyes and let her mind drift back to that night, to the moment when everything changed. Afghanistan, October 2011. The Blackhawks rotors kicked up clouds of dust and gravel as it touched down at Forward Operating Base Chapman. Hannah Reyes grabbed her sea bag and medical kit, hunching low as she ran toward the waiting Marines. The thin mountain air hit her lungs like ice, and the peaks surrounding the base loomed like ancient sentinels against the pale sky.
"You the new doc?" Sergeant Marcus Mac Dalton stepped forward, his weathered face skeptical as he took in Hannah's slight frame. At 6'2" and built like a linebacker, Mac made her look even smaller than her 5'2" height suggested. "Corporal Reyes, Sergeant. Combat medic, 2nd Battalion." She shouldered her pack with practiced ease, though it was nearly half her body weight. "Right." Mac's tone suggested he was reserving judgment. "Follow me. I'll show you around." The FOB was a maze of concrete barriers, plywood buildings, and sandbags. Mountains rose on all sides, their rocky faces scarred by centuries of wind and war. Hannah counted guard towers, noted fields of fire, automatically cataloging everything through the lens of her medical training. Where would the wounded come from? How would they get them out? What were the sight lines to the landing zone? "You done this before?" The question came from Lance Corporal Jamie Brooks, a kid who couldn't be more than 20, his Chicago accent thick despite months overseas. He fell into step beside them, radio handset clipped to his flak jacket. "Iraq, 1 tour. Al-Anbar Province." "No shit? My brother was in Fallujah. Said it was intense." It was. They passed a group of Marines cleaning weapons outside a wooden building marked 3rd Squad. A few looked up as they approached, and Hannah caught the familiar expression, curious, slightly amused, definitely doubting. She'd seen it before in Iraq, and before that at every duty station since boot camp. "Hey, Mac," one of them called out. "That the new corpsman? She looks like she could use a corpsman herself." Laughter rippled through the group. Hannah kept walking, her expression unchanged. Mac shot a warning glare at his Marines. "That's enough. Daniels, get back to cleaning that weapon." They reached a small building housing the medical bay where Staff Sergeant Elena Navarro was waiting for them. Tall and formidable, with kind eyes and graying temples, she looked Hannah up and down with the efficiency of someone who spent years evaluating Marines. "Welcome to Paradise, Rez. I'm Staff Sergeant Navarro, Senior Corpsman. You'll be working directly with the line squads, mostly Mac's 3rd Squad and Patterson's 2nd Squad." She gestured toward a small office. "Come on, let's talk." The office was cramped but organized, medical supplies stacked neatly on metal shelves. Navarro closed the door and leaned against her desk. "I read your file. Iraq Combat Action Ribbon, Navy Achievement Medal with Combat V. Impressive. But this isn't Al-Anbar. These mountains will test you in ways the desert never did. The altitude, the cold, the terrain, it's all working against you." "I understand, Staff Sergeant." "Do you?" Navarro's eyes narrowed. "Because I've seen good Marines, strong Marines, tough Marines struggle here. And no offense, but you're not exactly built like a pack mule." Hannah met her gaze steadily. "Respectfully, Staff Sergeant, I didn't come here to be built like anything. I came here to keep Marines alive." A slow smile spread across Navarro's face. "Good answer. But understanding the mission and completing it are two different things. Out here, respect isn't given. It's earned one way only. You prove you can do the job when everything goes to hell, and these Marines will follow you anywhere. You hesitate, you falter, you need someone else to carry your load? Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that." Outside, Hannah could hear Marines laughing, the sound mixing with the distant rumble of generators and the occasional radio check. She thought about her father's ranch in South Texas, where she'd learned that size meant nothing when there was work to be done. She'd carried injured calves that outweighed her, worked 16-hour days in heat that melted lesser souls, and never once complained about being too small for the job. "When do I meet the rest of the squad?" "Tonight. Mac's got a patrol briefing at 1900 hours. You're going out with them tomorrow night. Routine reconnaissance up in the mountains. Good way to get your feet wet." That evening, Hannah sat in the back of the squad bay as Mac briefed the mission. The other Marines, 8 of them, all looking impossibly young despite their combat experience, listened with the casual attention of professionals who'd done this hundreds of times. "Intelligence reports possible insurgent movement in grid square 4721, Mac was saying, pointing to a map tacked to the plywood wall. "We'll establish an overwatch position here, observe for 24 hours, then move back. Standard patrol load, night vision, and—" He glanced at Hannah. "Doc Reyes will be joining us." Private First Class Ryan Cole, barely 18 and still baby-faced despite months in country, raised his hand. "Sergeant, is she going to be able to keep up? I mean, no disrespect, but those mountains are brutal." "She'll keep up," Max said flatly, "or she won't go out again. Simple as that."
Hannah said nothing, just took notes on the route, medical evacuation procedures, and contingency plans. She'd proven herself before. She'd do it again. The patrol moved out at 2,000 hours, slipping through the wire under a moonless sky. Hannah had painted her face with camouflage grease and checked her gear 3 times: medical kit, personal weapon, night vision goggles, water, and enough supplies to keep 8 Marines alive for 2 days. The weight distribution felt familiar, though the thin air at 8,000 feet made every step a conscious effort. Mac led the column, with Hannah positioned 3rd in line behind Brooks and his radio. She could hear the radio operator's nervous breathing through the headset chatter and made a mental note to check his stress levels. First-time combat stress could manifest in dozens of ways, most of them dangerous. The terrain was unforgiving. Loose shale that threatened to cascade with every footstep, narrow paths that barely accommodated a single file, and drops that disappeared into darkness on either side. Hannah focused on her breathing and foot placement, staying close enough to the Marine in front of her to maintain contact, but far enough back to avoid creating a bunched target. 30 minutes into the patrol, they reached the first checkpoint, where Captain Ahmed Rahimi waited with 2 Afghan National Army soldiers. Rahimi was a former schoolteacher turned soldier, fluent in English and possessed of the kind of calm competence that inspired confidence. He'd worked with American units for 3 years and had developed a reputation for reliability. "Good evening, Sergeant Dalton," Rahimi said quietly, checking his own equipment. "The route ahead is clear, but we have reports of movement in the eastern valleys. Perhaps insurgents, perhaps smugglers. In these mountains, sometimes there is no difference." Mac consulted his map by red-filtered flashlight. "How long to the overwatch position?" 2 hours if we take the main trail, 4 hours if we use the goat paths." Rahimi glanced toward the eastern ridgeline where distant lights flickered. "I recommend the goat paths tonight." "Longer route it is." Mac folded the map. "Doc, you good with extended movement?" Hannah adjusted her pack straps. "Good to go, Sergeant." They climbed steadily for another hour, the only sounds their controlled breathing and the soft scrape of boots on stone. Hannah found her rhythm, the familiar meditation of foot placement and breath control that had carried her through countless training exercises and combat patrols. Behind her, Cole was struggling with the altitude, but he kept pace without complaint. At 19, he was the youngest member of the patrol, eager to prove himself but smart enough to know his limitations. "Take smaller sips of water," she advised quietly. "The altitude will dehydrate you faster than you think." "Thanks, Doc." His gratitude was genuine. "This your first time up here?" "First time in these specific mountains. Iraq was different terrain, but the principles are the same. Watch your footing, conserve energy, trust your training." Rahimi appeared beside them during a brief halt, moving with the silent grace of someone born in these mountains. "Your medic is wise. In my village, we say the mountains teach patience to those who listen and bury those who do not." The final approach to their overwatch position required them to navigate a particularly treacherous section of trail that hugged the side of a cliff. I could feel the empty space to my right, a 500-foot drop into darkness. I focused on the pack straps of the Marine in front of me, placing each foot deliberately, breathing steadily. When they finally reached the observation point, a natural depression in the rocks that provided both concealment and fields of fire, Hannah was tired but not exhausted. More importantly, she'd kept pace with Marines who outweighed her by 50 pounds or more. She noticed Mac watching her as she set up her position, something like approval flickering across his weathered features. "Good movement, Doc. Get some rest. We'll be here until tomorrow night." As the Marines settled into defensive positions, Hannah organized her medical supplies and checked communications with the base. The mountains stretched endlessly in all directions, beautiful and hostile under the star-filled sky. In a few hours, the sun would rise over peaks that had witnessed centuries of conflict, and she would be one more small figure in an ancient landscape of war. She had no way of knowing that before the next sunset, everything would change. At 0347 hours, the mountains exploded.
Hannah jerked awake from a light doze as muzzle flashes erupted from 3 sides simultaneously. The crack of AK-47s mixed with the deeper boom of RPGs, and tracer rounds streaked through the darkness like deadly fireworks. The patrol's observation post, which had seemed perfectly concealed hours earlier, was now a kill zone. "Contact left! Contact front!" Mac's voice cut through the chaos as he rolled behind a boulder, his M4 already returning fire. "Brooks, get on the radio! Call for immediate support!" Hannah pressed herself against the rocky ground as bullets whined overhead, her training taking over despite the surge of adrenaline. Count the shooters, identify the wounds, prepare for casualties. The enemy fire was coming from at least 15 different positions, a coordinated ambush that had probably been planned for hours. An RPG detonated 10 feet to her right, showering the position with rock fragments and filling the air with cordite smoke. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard someone scream. "I'm hit! Jesus, I'm hit!" Brooks was on his back, clutching his shoulder where shrapnel had torn through his flak jacket. Blood seeped between his fingers, black in the green glow of her night vision. Hannah low-crawled toward him, her medical kit bouncing against her back. "Where else are you hit?" "My leg, I think. Can't feel my leg." Panic edged his voice as he tried to sit up. "Stay down." She pressed him back against the rocks and began cutting away his uniform. The shoulder wound was messy, but not immediately life-threatening. The shrapnel had missed the major arteries. But his left leg was a different story. A large piece of metal had penetrated his thigh, and she could see the dark pulse of arterial bleeding. "Mac, I need cover!" she shouted over the gunfire. "Working on it, Doc." Mac's rifle fired in controlled bursts, but she could hear the strain in his voice. Something was wrong. Another RPG exploded, this one closer. The concussion knocked Hannah sideways, and when she looked up, she saw Mac slumped against his position, rifle fallen beside him. A dark stain spread across his utilities from somewhere near his ribs. "Sergeant!" Cole appeared beside Mac, his young face white with shock. "He's bleeding bad!" Hannah's mind raced through triage protocols. 2 wounded, enemy fire from multiple positions, no radio contact with base. She applied pressure to Brooks's leg wound and looked around desperately for Rahimi. The Afghan captain materialized out of the smoke, his own weapon blazing as he provided covering fire. "We must move. They are trying to surround us." "Brooks's radio is destroyed," Cole reported, panic creeping into his voice. "I can't reach base." Hannah felt the familiar calm that came with crisis. Her instructors at Field Medical School had called it the zone, that strange state where time slowed and everything became crystal clear. She assessed both wounded Marines with clinical detachment. Brooks, penetrating trauma to left thigh, arterial bleeding controlled but significant blood loss. Shrapnel wounds to right shoulder and arm, non-life-threatening, conscious but showing early signs of shock. Mac, gunshot wound to right side, possible liver involvement, conscious but weakening, unable to move under his own power. The enemy fire was intensifying, closing in on their position. Soon they would be overrun. "How far to the base?" she asked Rahimi. 5 miles by the main trail, 7 by the safe routes." His eyes met hers in the darkness. "Too far to carry wounded." Hannah looked at Brooks, then at Mac, then at the terrain between their position and safety. Every regulation, every protocol said to hunker down and wait for rescue, but rescue might not come in time. "We're not waiting," she said. "Doc, you can't be serious." Mac's voice was weak but adamant. "Leave us. Take Cole and get back to base. Send help." Hannah ignored him, already stripping gear from her pack and arranging it on the ground. In Iraq, she'd once dragged a 200-pound Marine 3 blocks through Ramadi while under sniper fire. These mountains were different, but the principle was the same. You didn't leave people behind. "This is insane," Cole whispered, but he was already helping her secure the makeshift stretchers. "The terrain alone will kill us." "The terrain kills you if you fight it," Rahimi said, checking his ammunition. "If you move with it, it can hide you." He pointed toward a barely visible trail that wound down the far side of their position. There are old smuggling routes, very difficult, but they avoid the main valleys where the enemy expects us to go.
Hannah finished rigging the first stretcher and tested its weight distribution. Brooks would have to go first. His bleeding was more severe, and shock was setting in. Every minute they delayed increased the chance of losing him. "I can't let you do this," Mac said, his voice growing weaker. "I'm the squad leader. This is my call." "You're wounded and in no condition to make tactical decisions." Hannah's tone brooked no argument. "I'm the senior medical authority for this patrol, and I'm making a medical decision. Both of you need immediate surgical intervention that you won't get if we stay here." She looked directly at Mac, her small frame somehow commanding despite the chaos around them. "I carried a 240-pound Marine through 3 blocks of Ramadi. You weigh maybe 180. I've got this." An RPG exploded uncomfortably close, reminding them all that the enemy was still maneuvering for a better position. Soon their rocky shelter would be untenable. "There's another problem," Cole said quietly. "If we move both of them, who's going to provide security? We'll be sitting ducks." Rahimi chambered around in his rifle. "I will scout the head, clear the path. Cole will watch our backs. And the doctor," he smiled grimly, "she will do the impossible." Hannah had already strapped Brooks onto the first stretcher and was securing Mac to the second. Both Marines were conscious but weak, their faces pale in the green glow of night vision. She distributed the extra weight from their gear among the remaining members of the patrol, keeping only essential medical supplies and ammunition. "Listen to me," she said, kneeling between the 2 stretchers. "This is going to be the longest night of your lives. I need you both to stay conscious, stay alert, and tell me immediately if anything changes with your condition. Can you do that?" Brooks nodded weakly. "How are you going to carry us both?" "One at a time, leapfrog movement. Drag one stretcher forward, come back for the other." She checked her watch. 0415 hours. Dawn was still 2 hours away. They could use the darkness. "We move in 15-minute intervals. Cover, rest, cover, rest." Mac grabbed her arm with surprising strength. "Hannah, Doc, if this goes sideways, if we get pinned down again, you leave us. Promise me." She looked into his eyes, seeing not the gruff sergeant who doubted her, but a Marine who was trusting her with his life. "I promise you'll see the sunrise from inside that FOB." It wasn't the promise he'd asked for, but it was the only one she was willing to make. The first mile nearly broke her. Hannah had underestimated how the thin mountain air would affect her endurance, and the improvised stretchers were heavier and more unwieldy than she'd calculated. By the time they'd moved 500 meters from their original position, her shoulders were screaming and her legs trembled with fatigue. But she kept moving. Drag Brooks forward 50 meters. Return for Mac. Drag him forward. Check wounds. Adjust bandages. Sip water. Move again. The rhythm became meditative, a series of small goals that made the impossible seem merely difficult. Rahimi moved like a ghost ahead of them, appearing periodically to guide them around obstacles or redirect their route when he spotted enemy movement. Twice they had to take cover while insurgent search parties passed nearby, their voices echoing off the canyon walls as they looked for the missing Americans. "How you holding up, Doc?" Cole whispered in one of their rest stops. The kid had shed his initial panic and was proving surprisingly steady under pressure. "I'm fine," Hannah lied, wiping sweat from her eyes despite the cold mountain air. Her hands were raw from the poncho straps, and every muscle in her body felt like it was on fire. But Brooks's bleeding had stopped, and Mac was still conscious and responsive. That was what mattered. "My mom always said I was too small to play football. Guess she was wrong about what I was built for." Mile 2 was easier. Hannah had found her pace, and the terrain became slightly more forgiving as they descended into a series of connected ravines. But Mac was getting heavier, not physically, but emotionally. He kept trying to convince her to leave him behind. "I'm slowing you down," he muttered during one rest stop. "Brooks needs surgery.
I'm just dead weight. You're not dead, so you're not dead weight. Hannah checked his pulse and blood pressure with a small field monitor. Still stable, but barely. Besides, somebody has to explain to the colonel why his star medic disobeyed direct orders. That's your job. Despite his pain, Mac almost smiled. Direct orders? The part where you told me to leave you behind. That was an order, right? Because I'm pretty sure I just violated it. During Mile 3, they encountered their first real obstacle. A rock slide had blocked the narrow trail Rahimi was following, forcing them either to backtrack 2 miles or attempt to traverse a steep scree slope in the darkness. Hannah looked at the rock and calculated angles, weight distribution, and the energy cost of each option.
We go over, she decided, but we do it smart. She rigged a rope system using paracord and carabiners, creating anchors that would prevent the stretchers from sliding if she lost her footing. It took 20 minutes to set up, 20 minutes they couldn't afford, but it worked. Cole helped guide the stretchers from above while Hannah climbed with them, one at a time, her legs burning with the effort. Halfway across the slope, enemy voices echoed from the valley below. Flashlight beams swept the darkness, searching for any sign of their passage. Hannah pressed herself against the rocks, then waited, feeling Mac's pulse through his wrist, fast but steady. They're moving away, Rahimi's voice came through their comm system. But we must hurry. Dawn comes soon. Mile 4 was when Hannah hit the wall. Her body simply stopped responding to her will. She'd been moving for 3 hours, carrying weights that would challenge Marines twice her size, and the altitude was finally catching up with her. During one rest stop, she found herself unable to stand. "Doc," Brooks's voice was weak but concerned. "You okay?" Hannah sat on a boulder, head between her knees, fighting off nausea and dizziness. Her vision grayed at the edges, and for a moment she wondered if this was how it would end, all of them dying on a mountainside because she'd been too stubborn to know her limitations. Then she remembered something her father had told her during a particularly brutal day on the ranch. "Mija, your body will quit 1,000 times before your heart does. The trick is not listening to your body." She stood up, grabbed the stretcher straps, and kept moving. Dawn was breaking over the eastern peaks when they finally saw the lights of FOB Chapman in the valley below. What should have been a moment of triumph felt more like staring at the summit of Everest, close enough to see, still impossibly far away. The final mile would take them across open ground, a killing field, where they'd be exposed to observation and fire from multiple directions. Worse, Hannah could hear vehicles moving in the distance, enemy forces still hunting for them. There, Rahimi pointed to a cluster of boulders about 400 meters from the FOB's perimeter. "If we can reach those rocks, the base's sentries will see us." Hannah looked at the distance and felt her reserves finally hit empty. She'd been running on adrenaline and willpower for the past hour, but her body was beginning to shut down. Her hands shook as she checked her patience one more time. Brooks was unconscious but stable, his vital signs holding steady despite significant blood loss. Mac was awake but gray-faced, his breathing shallow. He'd lost more blood than she'd initially thought, and she was running out of time. "Doc?" Brooks's voice was weak but concerned. "You okay?" Hannah sat on a boulder, head between her knees, fighting off nausea and dizziness. Her vision grayed at the edges, and for a moment she wondered if this was how it would end, all of them dying on a mountainside because she'd been too stubborn to know her limitations. Then she remembered something her father had told her during a particularly brutal day on the ranch. "Mija, your body will quit 1,000 times before your heart does. The trick is not listening to your body." She stood up, grabbed the stretcher straps, and kept moving. "On my count," Hannah said, gripping both sets of straps. 3, 2, 1. They burst from concealment and sprinted across the open ground. Hannah's world narrowed to the rhythm of her feet and the weight of the stretchers bouncing behind her. Somewhere in the distance, she heard shouting. Whether friendly or enemy, she couldn't tell. 200 meters. Her lungs burned and her vision blurred, but the FOB's wire fence was getting closer. 100 meters. Gunfire erupted behind them, definitely enemy.
Bullets whined overhead, but she didn't slow down. 50 meters. She could see Marines running toward them from the base, medics with stretchers of their own. 20 meters. Her legs gave out. Hannah collapsed face first into the rocky ground, her hands still gripping the stretcher straps. The last thing she saw before losing consciousness was Mac's face looking down at her, his expression a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "Smallest Marine I ever served with, and the strongest," she heard him tell someone. When she woke up 6 hours later in the base medical facility, both Marines were in surgery. They would both survive, both return to full duty, and both would spend the rest of their lives trying to figure out how to thank a 120-pound medic who had refused to accept the impossible.
Hannah never told anyone the full story of that night. When the after-action reports were filed, she kept her account brief and clinical. 2 Marines wounded in enemy contact, successful evacuation to base medical facility, no friendly casualties. She never mentioned the 5 miles, the improvised stretchers, or the moment when her body quit but her heart kept going. Some stories, she believed, were better left untold. Present day. For 13 years, Hannah Reyes lived with her secret. She left the Marine Corps quietly in 2013, declining interviews and avoiding reunions. The official record showed her service as exemplary but unremarkable, a combat medic who had done her job competently in a difficult theater. The full story of that October night in Kunar Province existed only in a classified after-action report that few people ever read. Hannah settled in Marfa, Texas, a small desert town where the night sky stretched endlessly and the silence felt like home. She worked as a paramedic for the county emergency services, responding to highway accidents and ranch emergencies with the same calm competence that had once saved Marines under fire. Her colleagues knew she was a veteran, but she never talked about her deployments. On quiet nights, when the desert wind whispered through the mesquite trees, she sometimes thought about Mac and Brooks. She'd heard through unofficial channels that both had recovered fully and completed their tours. Mac had made gunnery sergeant and was stationed at Quantico. Brooks had left the Corps and was attending college somewhere in Illinois. They'd tried to reach out a few times over the years, but Hannah never responded to their messages. Some things, she believed, were better left in the past. She was wrong. 300 miles away in San Antonio, Ryan Cole was telling the story again. Now 31 and working as a high school history teacher, Cole had a habit of sharing military stories with his students when they studied recent conflicts. Usually, he kept the tales sanitized, heroes and villains clearly defined, outcomes neat and satisfying. But this story was different. "I want you to understand something about courage," he told his AP history class on a warm Friday afternoon in spring 2024. "It doesn't always look like what you see in movies. Sometimes it looks like a 12-pound woman dragging 2 wounded Marines 5 miles through enemy territory because she refuses to accept that some things are impossible." The students were quiet, sensing something personal in their teacher's voice. "I was there," he continued. "I watched her do it. And for 13 years, nobody outside our unit has ever heard this story because she never wanted the recognition." After class, a student named Maria approached his desk. "Mr. Cole, that story about the Marine medic, do you think someone should write about it? Like, shouldn't people know?" Cole considered the question for a long moment. Maybe they should. That weekend, he made a phone call to a journalist friend at the San Antonio Express-News. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Lance Corporal Jamie Brooks, now Dr. Jamie Brooks, trauma surgeon at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, was having his own moment of reflection. He just finished a 16-hour surgery, saving the life of a motorcycle accident victim, when a colleague made an offhand comment about military medics. "You military guys always act like combat medicine is so different from what we do here, like you're the only ones who've ever worked under pressure." Brooks looked at his hands, still steady despite the marathon surgery, and thought about a night in Afghanistan when another medic had saved his life through sheer force of will. "You know what?" he said quietly. "You're right, we're not special.
but some individuals are. That night, he called information and asked for a number in Virginia. Sergeant Major Marcus Dalton, now assigned to Marine Corps Recruiting Command, answered on the third ring. "Mac, it's Jamie Brooks from 3rd Squad, Kunar Province." The line went quiet for a moment. "Brooks? Jesus, it's been what, 10 years since we talked? How are you doing?" "Good, really good. Listen, I need to ask you something. Do you ever think about that night, October 15th, 2011? Another pause. "Every day." "Same. Mac, I've been thinking. What Hannah did for us, it's not right that nobody knows. I'm a doctor now, and I've seen amazing things, but what she accomplished that night?" Brooks' voice trailed off. "It was impossible, and she made it look routine." Dalton was quiet for a long moment. "I've been carrying that weight for 13 years, Brooks. The knowledge that I doubted her, that I tried to order her to leave us behind. She was half my size and twice my strength, and I never got to properly thank her. Maybe it's time we did something about that." The conversation lasted 2 hours. By the end, they had a plan. 2 weeks later, Gunnery Sergeant Cole Vance received an unusual phone call at his office in Quantico. Vance, now Senior Enlisted Advisor for Marine Corps Public Affairs, listened carefully as Dalton explained the situation.
You want to organize a recognition ceremony for a Marine who specifically doesn't want recognition, Vance asked. "She saved our lives, Gunny, and she did it when everyone, including me, thought she couldn't handle the job. People need to hear this story." Vance leaned back in his chair, remembering his own time in Afghanistan. He'd been a squad leader in a different sector of Kunar Province, and he vaguely recalled hearing about a female medic who'd done something exceptional. At the time, he'd dismissed it as typical war story exaggeration. "What's her current status?" "Civilian, working as a paramedic in Texas. Staff Sergeant Navarro has maintained contact with her over the years." "Navarro? Elena Navarro? She's my boss now." The conversation with Navarro was easier than expected. She'd been quietly proud of Hannah for years and had often wondered if the story would ever be told properly. "She won't come if she knows it's about her," Navarro warned. "Hannah has spent 13 years avoiding anything that looks like recognition. But maybe if I told her it was a general ceremony, that I just wanted her there for support." "That's deception, Staff Sergeant. That's tactical misdirection, Gunny. There's a difference." The plan came together with military precision. The annual Marine Corps birthday celebration in Washington would provide the perfect venue. They would prepare a special recognition segment, officially honoring Hannah for her actions in Afghanistan, but she wouldn't know until the moment her name was called. It was risky. Hannah might walk out, might refuse to participate, but Dalton, Brooks, and the others agreed that some stories were too important to remain untold. 3 months later, Navarro made the call to Marfa. "Hannah, it's Lena. I need a favor." "Step Sergeant?" Hannah's voice was warm but cautious. She knew Navarro well enough to recognize when she was being maneuvered. "I'm speaking at the Marine Corps birthday celebration in D.C. next month. It's a big deal. Lots of dignitaries, press coverage, the whole show. I was hoping you might come. Moral support." Hannah was quiet for a long moment. "Elena, you know how I feel about those kinds of events." "I do, but I also know that 13 years ago, you taught me something of courage that I've never forgotten. I could use some of that courage on stage with me." "That's deception, Staff Sergeant." "That's tactical misdirection, Gunny. There's a difference." The plan came together with military precision. The annual Marine Corps birthday celebration in Washington would provide the perfect venue. They would prepare a special recognition segment, officially honoring Hannah for her actions in Afghanistan, but she wouldn't know until the moment her name was called. It was risky. Hannah might walk out, might refuse to participate, but Dalton, Brooks, and the others agreed that some stories were too important to remain untold. 3 months later, Navarro made the call to Marfa. "Hannah, it's Elena. I need a favor." "Staff Sergeant?"
Hannah's voice was warm but cautious. She knew Navarro well enough to recognize when she was being maneuvered. "I'm speaking at the Marine Corps birthday celebration in D.C. next month. It's a big deal. Lots of dignitaries, press coverage, the whole show. I was hoping you might come. Moral support." Hannah was quiet for a long moment. "Elena, you know how I feel about those kinds of events." "I do, but I also know that 13 years ago, you taught me something of courage that I've never forgotten. I could use some of that courage on stage with me." "Just as a guest," Hannah said finally. "I sit in the back, I clap at the right times, and I leave when it's over." "Just as a guest," Navarro agreed, crossing her fingers behind her back. The ballroom fell silent as Gunnery Sergeant Vance stepped to the podium. Hannah, seated near the back in her simple black dress, felt a familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach. She'd been uncomfortable since arriving, sensing undercurrents she couldn't identify. Several Marines had looked at her with recognition, though she couldn't place their faces. "Tonight," Vance began, "we honor not just our Corps' birthday, but the individual Marines who embody our highest ideals. Sometimes, these Marines perform their greatest act of service in darkness, witnessed by few, remembered by those whose lives they touched." Hannah's hands clenched in her lap. Beside her, Navarro placed a steadying hand on her arm. 14 years ago, in the mountains of Kunar Province, Afghanistan, a Marine combat medic faced an impossible choice. The room temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. Hannah started to stand, but Navarro's grip tightened. 2 critically wounded Marines, no radio contact, 5 miles of enemy territory between their position and safety. Hannah felt her breathing become shallow. Around the room, heads were turning toward her, recognition dawning on faces she was beginning to remember. There, in the third row, was that Ryan Cole? And next to him? Most people would say it couldn't be done. A 120-pound medic carrying 2 wounded Marines 5 miles through mountain terrain in darkness under enemy fire. Most people would say it was impossible. He paused, his eyes finding Hannah's across the crowded room. Corporal Hannah Reyes proved that impossible is just another word for difficult. The applause started slowly, then built like thunder. Hannah sat frozen as the entire room rose to its feet. Through the standing ovation, she saw familiar faces, Mac and Brooks in the front row, both in dress uniforms, both smiling through tears. "Corporal Reyes, would you please join us on stage?" "No." Hannah's voice was barely a whisper. "Elena, no, you said this was just—" "Hannah." Navarro turned to face her, her expression gentle but firm. "For 13 years, you've carried this alone. Let us carry it with you." From the front row, Mac's voice carried across the silent room. "Doc, get up here!" Brooks joined in. "Come on, Hannah, time to face the music."
Then the entire room was chanting her name, and she found herself walking toward the stage on unsteady legs, feeling exposed and terrified, and strangely relieved all at once. As she reached the podium, Vance stepped aside, but not before whispering, "There's one more surprise." From the side entrance, a figure emerged that made Hannah's breath catch. Captain Ahmed Rahimi, older now but unmistakable, walked across the stage in a crisp suit, a slight smile on his weathered face. "My friend," he said simply, extending his hand, "it has been too long." Hannah took his hand, then found herself pulled into an embrace that felt like coming home. The room erupted again, but all she could hear was Rahimi's voice in her ear. "The mountains remember, Hannah. They remember what you did." Vance approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have gathered testimony from every member of that patrol, from the medical personnel who treated the wounded Marines, and from Afghan National Army records. What Corporal Reyes accomplished that night has been verified and documented. She single-handedly carried 2 wounded Marines to safety across 5 miles of hostile terrain, evading enemy patrols and navigating treacherous mountain paths in complete darkness.
He held up a small blue folder. By order of the Commandant of the Marine Corps, Corporal Hannah Reyes is hereby awarded the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat operations. The room exploded. Hannah stood frozen at the podium, staring at the medal case in Vance's hands. The Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor in the U.S. military. She'd never dreamed, never... "I can't," she whispered to Vance. "I don't deserve this." "Doc," Mac's voice came from the front row, strong and clear. "I carried you when I couldn't carry myself. Let us carry you now." Hannah looked out at the sea of faces, Marines she'd served with, Marines she'd never met, civilians who understood what service meant, all of them looking at her with something she'd never seen before. Not pity, not doubt, but pure respect. Vance leaned toward the microphone. "Corporal Reyes has been invited to say a few words." The room fell silent. Hannah looked at the microphone, then at the faces in the crowd, then at Mac and Brooks, who were both nodding encouragement. She stepped forward. Hannah stood at the microphone for a long moment, gathering her thoughts. The ballroom was perfectly quiet, 300 people waiting to hear from a woman who had spent 13 years avoiding exactly this moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "I've spent a lot of years thinking about that night in Afghanistan, trying to understand what happened, why it happened, what it meant." She paused, her eyes finding familiar faces in the crowd. "I think I've been asking the wrong questions." She looked directly at Mac and Brooks. "I used to wonder if I was strong enough to carry 2 grown Marines 5 miles, but that's not what happened that night. I didn't carry them alone." Her gaze shifted to Rahimi. "Captain Rahimi guided us through paths I never could have found. He drew enemy fire away from us when we were most vulnerable. Without him, we would have died on that mountain." Rahimi inclined his head slightly, his eyes bright. "Ryan Cole provided security and carried extra gear, even though he was scared and exhausted. He never complained, never faltered." She found Cole in the crowd. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, Ryan. It's doing your job despite the fear." Cole wiped his eyes and nodded. "And Marcus and Jamie," her voice caught slightly, "you think I carried you that night, but you're wrong. You carried me. Your trust, your refusal to give up, your belief that we could make it, that's what got us home." She stepped back from the microphone, then forward again. "People keep calling me a hero. That word makes me uncomfortable because heroes are supposed to be special, different, larger than life." She gestured toward the crowd. "But look around this room. Every person wearing a uniform, every person who has served has faced moments when they had to choose between what was easy and what was right. The only difference between me and anyone else is that my moment happened to be witnessed." The room was absolutely still. "I didn't do anything that any of you wouldn't have done. I didn't do anything that Marcus or Jamie or Ryan wouldn't have done if our positions were reversed. That's what makes us Marines. Not our willingness to be heroes, but our refusal to let each other down." She held up the medal case. "This doesn't belong to me. It belongs to every medic who has crawled toward gunfire to reach a wounded Marine. It belongs to every squad leader who has risked everything to bring their people home. It belongs to every young Marine who has looked fear in the face and said, 'Not today.'" Her voice grew stronger. "It belongs to the Marines who didn't come home from that deployment, and from every deployment. The ones whose names are on walls instead of in ceremony programs. They're the real heroes." Hannah reached into her purse and pulled out a small American flag, folded in the traditional triangle. She placed it on the podium. "This flag was given to me by the family of Hospital Corpsman 2nd Class David Chen, who was killed in Helmand Province 2 months after our rescue. He died saving 3 Marines from an IED blast. Dave never got a ceremony like this. His heroism lasted 30 seconds, not 5 hours.
but it was just as real, just as important. She looked out at the crowd one final time. If you want to honor what happened that night in Kunar Province, don't focus on me. Focus on the fact that 5 people went into those mountains and 5 people came home. That's not because one of us was extraordinary. It's because all of us were ordinary Marines doing what Marines do. We took care of each other. Hannah stepped back from the podium. The room remained silent for several heartbeats, then erupted in applause that seemed to go on forever. She stood quietly, accepting the ovation, not for herself, but for everyone who had ever worn the uniform. As the applause finally died down, Mac and Brooks rose from their seats and walked to the stage. Without a word, they flanked Hannah, standing at attention. Rahimi joined them, then Cole, then Navarro. One by one, other Marines in the room stood and moved toward the stage until Hannah was surrounded by a sea of dress blue uniforms. She looked around at the faces surrounding her, young and old, male and female, representing decades of service and sacrifice. For the first time in 13 years, she didn't feel alone with her memories. Later, as the ceremony wound down and people began to drift toward the exits, Hannah found herself standing alone with Navarro near the side of the stage. "You okay?" Navarro asked quietly. Hannah considered the question seriously. "You know what? I think I am. For the first time in 13 years, I think I actually am." "Any regrets about tonight?" Hannah looked out at the ballroom where Marines were sharing stories and reconnecting with old friends. Mac was showing pictures of his kids to Brooks, while Rahimi talked animatedly with Cole about his work with veterans organizations. "Just one," she said finally. "I wish I had trusted all of you sooner. I spent so many years thinking I had to carry this alone." Navarro smiled. "Marines don't do anything alone, Hannah. You should know that by now." As they prepared to leave, Hannah realized that she was looking forward to tomorrow for the first time in years. Not because the weight had been lifted, it would always be part of her, but because she finally understood that she didn't have to carry it by herself. Some burdens were meant to be shared. The mountains remembered what she had done that night. Now, finally, so did she. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.